and welcome. Today's conversation is brought to you by Penguin Random House and Mysuru Literary Forum Charitable Trust and the Mysuru Book Clubs. A warm welcome to you, Priyanka. A warm welcome to you, Sita. What a day. It would have been so wonderful to have both of you here in Mysuru along with the Penguin team and have your live. But then because of the situation, we are going virtual, but then the book club members and our audience are waiting for this. So that's that. So a few words about Priyanka. Priyanka Champaneri received her MFA in creative writing from Georgia Mason University and has been a fellow at Virginia Center for Creative Arts numerous times. She received the 2018 Restless Book Prize for New Immigrant Writing for the City of Good Death for her first novel. Welcome to you, Priyanka. All of us are waiting to hear you. And now over to Sita Bhaskar. It's about Sita Bhaskar, who's a great support for everything we do at the Mysuru Literary Forum Charitable Trust and the Mysuru Book Clubs. So Sita Bhaskar is the author of 2 books, Shielding Her Modesty and Flirting with Trouble, which are collections of short stories. She has also been flirting with her first novel, which she never seems to finish. So now we are going to really push her hard and say you have to do it fast. A warm welcome to all our viewers, trustees, and book club members, and the team from the Penguin. Please leave your questions in the YouTube. Our tech team is going to transfer them to the moderator. Please like and subscribe for our channel. A warm welcome again, and over to Sita Bhaskar and to Priyanka Champaneri. Here I sign off.
Thanks, Shubha. Good morning, Priyanka. I know it's early in the morning for you. Thanks for joining us that early. And just a correction, your alma mater may not like it, but you're from George Mason University. We don't want to be mentioning Georgia anywhere. And then, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the virtual launch of Priyanka Champaneri's book. The welcome from Mysuru Book Clubs and from the Mysuru Literary Forum Charitable Trust. I would like to start with the author, with Priyanka doing a reading, but before that, I just want to do a brief clip about the book so that one knows what one is going into. It's The City of Good Death. I love the book cover, Priyanka. The Indian book cover, that's Penguin India, it's lovely. Banaras, Varanasi, Kashi, India's holy city on the banks of the Ganges that has many names but holds one ultimate promise for Hindus. It is a place where pilgrims come for a good death, to be released from the cycle of reincarnation by the purifying fire. As the dutiful manager of the death hostel in Kashi, Pramesh welcomes the dying and assists the families bound for the funeral pyres that burn constantly on the ghats. The soul is gone, the body is burnt, the time is past, he tells them. Detach. After 10 years in the timeless city, Pramesh has nearly persuaded himself that there is no past or future. He lives contentedly at the death hostel with his wife Shobha, their young daughter Rani, the hostel priest, his hapless but winning assistant, and the constant flow of families with their dying. And then, one day, the past arrives in the lifeless form of a man pulled from the river, a man with an uncanny resemblance to Pramesh. Called twins in their childhood village, he and his cousin Sagar had been inseparable until Pramesh left to see the outside world and Sagar stayed to tend the land. After Pramesh married Shobha, defying his family's wishes, a rift opened up between the cousins that he had long tried to forget. I'll stop here because, this is just the beginning and there's so much more that happens. Now we'll allow Priyanka to read from the book.
Thank you so much, Sita, and also to Shubha and everybody at the Mysore Literary Trust. I so appreciate your time. This is my first India event, so I'm really excited. And so thank you also to everybody viewing for spending your evening over there with me. I'm going to read a section from the end of chapter 1, so not much has happened. We just have the book opening with 2 boatmen who have pulled a body out of the river, and nobody knows who it is or how it ended up getting there. So now gossip is starting to travel through the city, and I'm going to read a very short section from there. The news traveled quickly, and speculation trailed after to fill the holes that remained. The note found in the dead man's pocket could have pointed to suicide, but the rope tied around the wrist suggested an accidental drowning. And what of the 2 boatmen who dragged the body back, who certainly could have been murderers? All the other boatmen at Lalita got stuck up for the pair, except for Raman. Annoyed that his craft required exorcising and purification by priests, who insisted that it would take an entire day and a hefty sum of rupees, Raman sat on the topmost steps of the ghat, cursing his luck and smoking beedi after mango-flavored beedi. The others sat around gossiping or shouted theories as they passed each other on trips up and down the river, all focused on one detail. They found a note, didn't they? Has anyone read it? A love letter, most probably, a priest called out from the middle of the ghat as he scratched his chest. Always a woman to blame, he added to no one in particular as he labored up the steps. That's more likely. Perhaps he had a curse on his head. Or he was looking for Yamraj. See how close he was to Magadha? Nonsense, he was drunk and fell over. That Raman should have secured things better. What kind of duffer leaves his boat free for anyone to take? Well, he died in Kashi, so at least he will find peace. What fool would call that a good death, Kashi or no? Someone said the man's ghost is already terrorizing that widow in the woodworker's alley. Is it surprising? What to expect when the wretch dies in the middle of the river, on Magadha's doorstep, no less? Tales of what had happened, what might have happened, and what didn't happen swelled across the city, ferried from boatmen to Gatien, carried by rickshaw drivers and cart pullers, festering inside shops and whispered via family matriarchs, drifting to the street sweepers and even the drunks and lechers too ashamed to show themselves in the light. In the course of the telling, the truth expanded, broke into pieces, gilded itself, tripped in a puddle of filth, swabbed itself dry, and left fragments behind, until everyone in the old city knew at least some version of the story. Everyone, that is, except for the one who mattered most. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. From that very lyrical start, I'm just going to read a bit of the review. You've got so many accolades in the first few pages of your book. So I'm just going to read one that spoke to me a lot. From the opening words, she pulls you in, weaves you into the threads of Kashi, a city where people flock to die and others flee to a new life. Her impeccable sentences move through you like the river at the city's heart, tides of happiness interrupted by rising storms of fear, mystery, and difficult love. It is a book where magic lies right alongside the mess and beauty of human life. A book about family, tradition, and forgiveness, and about finding your way, even if it means turning your back on where you are from. So I think it's Lisa Carey, author of The Stolen Child, and that just exactly spoke to how I felt about the book. Yeah, so let's jump into more about the book. Mostly you read books about 2 sisters or a mother and a daughter. This is one book I've come across in a very long time that deals with 2 brothers, cousins actually, and the bond of loyalty between them. How each one wants the other to move on and not look back. and then the way they protect each other from their fathers, and then the way they lived their lives in each other's minds, it just broke my heart.
Mm.
So was writing about two brothers a conscious choice, or did it just fall into place when you started writing the book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think gender or any other defining characteristic ever comes into play whenever I have a character pop into my head. Usually, whenever I start a story, I start off with situation first. So some sort of conflict or some sort of beginning of conflict is what the first seed is. And out of that, I pull character. And it has nothing to do with the situation. It's just really whoever ends up showing up to that situation in my mind. It's not a conscious decision at all. And then you have all of the secondary and tertiary elements that come, like setting, timeline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in this case, there definitely was no, or in any case, to be honest, whenever I'm writing, there was no consideration that, oh, I happen to be writing about two, children who are cousins. They look so similar that people call them twins. They grow up like brothers, and then, they continue on in their adult lives. What I started off with, my entry point into writing this book, was that image that the book opens with of these two boatmen out on the river, trying to sneak a secret drink from their wives, and they come upon this body entangled in the anchor. And so then my next question became, well, who is this body? How did that body end up there? I knew that body was connected to somebody in the city, but I didn't yet know who or how or what the circumstances were or what their past together was. Then slowly I realized the body was a man. And then so you just go on this continual process of discovery, and it's really the story telling itself to me, and me having to be very careful to listen to what the story wants to be and who the characters are. But gender never comes into play with it. It's just whoever ends up showing up, who kind of raises their hand and says, you need to be writing about me.
Yeah, I think that, and I'm very glad that Pramesh and Sagar wandered into your book, because they are, just wonderful characters.
Thank
So,
you.
I just want to ask you, and there's a reason for me asking you, when did you finish the first draft of this book? And the reason I'm asking is that it really hit home for me because, we're reading it during a pandemic, and in the past years, so many hundreds of thousands of people who could not have their loved ones around them when they died. And so this book was catharsis, basically reading about families bringing their dying ones to Kashi to await death, about the opportunity to actually say goodbye, about the closure to the cycle of life and death. I'm sure your book was already in the publication phase when the pandemic rolled in, but looking back, do you feel that way about the book? Oh my God, my characters were actually able to bring closure, except for one, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, so there's no way anybody could have anticipated the timing of this. And it's horrible, horrible timing in a lot of ways, right? It's always horrible timing when you have hundreds of thousands. I don't know what the worldwide number is, but I know the US is up to, I think, 500,000 deaths from this
yes,
pandemic. This book, I started it in 2009, and because it took so long, the timeline is kind of muddled in my head, but I think I finished a full draft of it maybe 2015, 2016. And then it went through some very massive revisions as I was working with my agent and with my editor. That this full version that you all are able to read wasn't finished until the end of 2019, I believe. And so the book was originally supposed to be released both in the United States and in India in June of 2020. And in March, my American publisher, Restless Books, we started looking around and realizing something was happening globally that was unprecedented, that had no end date, and that was just going to absolutely change everything. So they made the very wise decision, and my India publisher agreed to delay publication until just a couple of weeks ago, February 2021. But the book had long been done. It had long been finalized, long been completed. So the pandemic, I have been living the pandemic just like everybody else, I think, in this constant state of day by day. What is happening next? This is just general question of really what is happening. And in the United States especially, there was just so many other things happening as well, politically, socially, et cetera, et cetera. I have received this question from a few people before in terms of commenting on just the relationship of the content of this book against what's happening globally, this very unique moment where we all as a globe can actually share this common experience, which doesn't come along very often. One can never predict falling into a zeitgeisty moment. And I think a lot of people have death at the forefront of their mind because it's all over the news and it's our central preoccupation. The thing that comes to mind for me is, I guess I wonder why death isn't at the forefront of everybody's mind all of the time, rather than just simply during a pandemic. And I understand that on a basic level. You know, certainly we're having this daily tragedy worldwide of people being snatched from us by this thing that nobody could have anticipated. And it oftentimes happens very, very suddenly, from what I'm understanding, and unexpectedly. But death is something I personally think about on a day-to-day basis. It's something that shapes probably every single one of my major life decisions, not in a morbid way, but in a way of, well, if I only had this day and I don't get to come back tomorrow, I don't get to wake up, what am I going to wish that I did whenever I have like a big decision in front of me? What am I going to feel like I should have done? And kind of, you know, maneuvering my actions in that direction. One thing I will say is that, you know, you always hope as a writer that a reader might take some comfort from your work, no matter what it might be about. I certainly hope that with this book, but I also am very realistic in that writing a book about death and thinking about it in a very general, abstract way, in a philosophical way, is entirely different from experiencing it in your real life and suddenly having this massive vacuum created because somebody who was there, who was part of your life, is now no longer there. So I will say that.
I did feel that way with Sagar's death in the, you're talking, if this was the last day, what would I do? And the way he comes towards his brother. And there was so much I felt that actually goes right into my next question, So death is so final. And then putting pieces together after a mysterious death, it's filled with sorrow. It's full of, if only or what if. So even though you haven't mentioned the period in which this novel is set, your world building shows us, because you show the train ride, the buffalo ride, and the social norms between men and women in the village. And so when you go through all that, and suddenly in the book, I realized that the distance between these two brothers was only 1 day's journey, which these days we wouldn't even think about. 1 day's journey, but the distance between them had grown a world apart. So, did you do that deliberately to show that distance in miles is not what creates distance between minds? Yeah.
You know, Sita, I have not even noticed that until you pointed it out to me during our email exchange before this meeting. It was not something that occurred to me at all. In terms of geographic distance, it was really, I needed it to fit the logic of the story. And I had a timeline in which all of these things had to happen. And so I thought to myself, okay, I need to give myself an allowance of so many days so that these other things can happen. So how far away then is this person going to be from Benares? But I love that idea. And I agree with you that it is not uncommon to have family members or friendships or whatever where you're only a couple of blocks away from the person or a street away from the person, but such a massive rift has occurred that even though bridging the geographic distance might seem easy enough, bridging that psychological and emotional distance is impossible. It just will take much more than just a few steps down the road. So yeah, go ahead.
Go on, go on.
No. Yeah, I don't know that I had much more to say about that. So, it's an interesting, just relationship in terms of, what do you have to do in order to move forward, to move closer to somebody in your life, to move further away, or to simply just and essentially cut that person's existence out of your life. So it might be that they really are living a street away, but if you have cut that person out of your life, it's as if they do not exist. If you're telling yourself, I'm not going to look back, then that means that you're not going to retain any of that memory of emotion. So even though they might be there, in your mind, you're walking by and they're not even in this world. I'm really, really glad you pointed that out to me, though, because it's not something I have thought about deliberately or intentionally, but it is something I'm thinking about now. In terms of it's just a question I have, and it is interesting. What does it take when you have that little distance? And talking about a contemporary period, certainly it might be just a day's journey away now, but with social media, it's not. It's what? It's like a quarter of a second, a tenth of a second to be able to contact that person. We really don't have any excuses in a modern age to not reach out to people. And yet, if that were true, we would all be living together very, very happily in this harmonious globe.
Yes.
And that, it's not even the matter of walking down the street. It's the matter of just pointing and clicking. And yet we cannot muster the effort because, again, that psychological and emotional trauma that we might have experienced from whatever rift is just too much to bridge.
Yes, and it did hit me because I so wanted Sagar to be alive. And so when I finally came to the stage where it was just a train journey and a bullet cart ride away, I mean, why couldn't you have made that effort?
Yeah.
But was there anything in particular that made you pick this particular theme or topic? Did you come across anything like a trigger, article, episode, incident?
Yeah, years ago, I don't know, maybe this was 2006 or 7, a friend of mine had sent me a link to a Reuters article, and the headline of the article was "Check in and die in 2 weeks or get out." And that article turned out to be about the death hostel, specifically about Mukti Bhavan, which I believe it might be the most famous one in Benares. And I'd grown up in a Hindu household and had been raised within this spiritual environment. And so I was familiar with Benares and that I knew it was a very important city, but it never bothered to unpack the idea more than that. And I didn't know anything about the death hostels. So this article was my introduction into reading about it. And something about it just really, really captivated me. And I think perhaps my interest was hooked from 2 different places or 2 different parts of my identity. And that, as I mentioned, growing up in a spiritual environment. My parents had filled the house with books on Hinduism and various, because I was a child, so adaptations of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and Panchatantra and just all these this rich literary tradition. So it was just something that had always just been living within my mind as is, and therefore I saw this idea of a death hostel as something perfectly practical and rational. It didn't seem unusual to me. It just seemed, just like, well, we're going on a road trip and we're going to have to stop midway somewhere and we're going to need a hotel. It seemed like something like that. Well, it's just that the journey is very different in this case. So that part of me didn't see it as anything that was unique. And yet I also had the part of me which has been born and raised in the United States of America and therefore ensconced or forced to contort myself within this very different perspective, one rooted, I think, in a Judeo-Christian perspective that I think views death a bit differently, which is fine. Neither approach is right or wrong, but it is a different approach, and one that I think made the death hostels into something unique. It was a concept that did not even approach the gates of this other perspective. So I was really conscious of that this one part of me saw a death hostel in a city like Benares as totally makes sense. Like, why would you even question that? Like, sure, if it's time, let's go. And then the other part of me that understood how unique and how different something like that might be to a pretty large part of the globe.
I think it's the closest to hospice care that we come here. As I was reading, I thought this is, hospice care, but the only difference is you are surrounded by family and generally a whole lot of people that you need at that point in
Yeah.
time.
And there's no care really, from what I understand. It's not,
Yes, no care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like obviously you want to keep that person comforted, etc. But I don't want to assume, but I wonder in the United States with hospice, there's always hope. Of course, there's always hope that you can have that person that you love so much continue on,
Mhm.
because you just don't want to face the enormity of that loss when they eventually go. And I wonder if there is a bit of a difference in perspective when you bring someone to a place like Shankar Bhavan, this fictional death hostel. Of course, you can't predict the enormity of emotion that's going to hit you when the person finally does leave, but
Yes.
you know why you are bringing that person there, and you have this time limit of 2 weeks. So I wonder if there is a slight difference of perspective, but again, I don't want to assume because I have not yet gone through that situation personally.
Correct. And I think I'm also generalizing the situation. This book is about unfinished business, and not just the main storyline, but all the subplots. And you've layered them so well, handling all your characters with skill, so that each one gets redemption, some even achieve moksha in a well deserved way, and some not. Your characters are vibrant, they're full of energy, full of life. They're all very nice people. That's what I liked. Even the guy who cheats people and takes them to the house of ill repute, as we would call it, even he's nice actually. And so it's so many characters to keep track of. Did you get impatient with any of your characters when they went off in their own direction and refused to toe the line?
What I have learned over the years of writing is that if I ever feel like I'm getting impatient with a character because they're not doing what I want them to do, I am the one who is wrong. It means I'm not listening to them. It means I'm trying to force them to do something that they're not supposed to be doing. So if I keep pushing on something and it's not moving, my job then is to take a step back and be like, okay, I'm not listening to them. What needs to be happening here instead? And then to go off in that direction. I thought it was really interesting, that observation about all of them being nice. Because I think one thing I try to do, one thing that really interests me as a reader is when I am reading a book and I have created an assumption about a character in my mind, and I'm very, very like, I've decided, okay, well, this is what the person is like. And then the writer does something, they accomplish this twist in the writing that takes me aback and makes me realize I was totally wrong in my assumption. I misjudged this person. And I think whenever a writer is able to do that, it's a true reflection of how complex people are and how multifaceted people are. There exists no black and white when it comes to an individual person. There are so many gradations. So I really truly believe that, the nicest person of like the highest morality, they possess a darker stripe to them. And then people who might seem like they are irredeemable, they have pockets of goodness, of light, maybe in their past, but at some moment. So that's something I try to do in my own work. And it's something I think maybe I was perhaps hopefully very, very subtle with it in this point. I will say in earlier drafts, I was way, way more direct. And I had so many more characters in earlier drafts. I had maybe double the characters,
Oh
and we
my.
ended up in revising. Yeah, I know, in revising, because I love, Sita, I love stories where you just have all these little side plots. You just have these little asides, and it might not contribute anything to the main plot, but I feel like when I'm reading, it just provides such rich texture. You're never going to see these people again, but here's this person's life story in 2 sentences. I just love, love, love books like that. So I had a lot of that going on. But one of my goals, and one of the reasons original drafts were so long, is I was trying to accomplish that kind of twist of being like, well, so far from what you've seen, somebody might assume that this person is really not worth hanging out with, as a human being. But let's take a look at what happened in their past. Let's fully consider who this person is, because any individual in real life deserves that. We shouldn't just, look at one single action and just judge them in entirety based on that one thing that they did. And that's something I'm still trying to learn as myself in real life as a human being. I have learned over the years that my first judgment of people is always wrong, always, always, always. And that, when you take the time to get to know someone and really unpack the layers of who they are, that's something the other person deserves, and something that we all deserve to receive from the people who we encounter in our life.
Correct, correct. I think it's good to think the best of a person and go into everything with an open mind. And if that gets proved wrong, you don't have to change the way you approach people. You just let go and move on. So, and that brings me to the women in your book. You're very gentle with the women in your book. There's a sisterhood where they all look out for each other. You know, just the act of sitting together, cleaning stones out of, the rice or rolling out rotis, and just the give and take of advice and suggestions while they do all this is so soothing. Even Mrs. Chalwa, you think she's going to be a witch. And then Mrs. Gupta, you think, oh my God, I don't know, why did you ever go there when you saw her or whatever? But both of them surprise you at the end. And these women are not helpless. They have agency, which they use to do the right thing in the book. So can you speak about the women and their sisterhood in the book?
Yeah, so I guess I can speak about Shobha, who is the hostel manager's wife,
Yeah.
Pramesh. It was really refreshing for me to be able to write those scenes and also take it as a breather, because Pramesh, the main character, is so internal. He's so inside of his head. It was difficult even for me. Like even now, I don't think I know everything about him. It was a lot of work to have to unpack and figure out what his deal was and really excavate all of those memories that just have shaped him in such defining ways. He was a lot of work. Shobha wasn't much work at all. She was so, so easy. And I think that's reflecting in her character as well, because she is quite open. And I think she does try to be open-hearted in a lot of ways, even though she is guarded. Um, she's interesting because I think she's a bit of an anomaly. She doesn't have any older female relatives around her at all. Both of her parents have passed, and her mother has passed before her father, and both of those losses were tremendous for her. But I think the loss of her mother is particularly one that leaves her stranded. So she finds this mother surrogate figure in her neighbor, Mrs. Mistry, who she also relies on to, kind of drop her daughter off with if she needs to run an errand. And I think there is genuine and real love in that relationship, but also there's a slight transactional element to it, probably in the way that we all have transactional elements as human beings, in that I might not like this person who is your friend, but I like you. And so in order to keep you happy, I'm also going to be polite and nice and hold my tongue in the face of this other person who in day-to-day life, I would prefer to stay away from. Those social rules are always so interesting to me, the etiquette of things, and also how etiquette, I think, is originally designed in order to just give us guidelines in life, how to act as human beings, but sometimes they can become restrictive cages. If you are forced to do something because it's the way that it's what's expected, it's the way that things are done, but the original reasoning for it is now far away from, the actual intent. So yeah, and just those scenes of domesticity, I love reading that kind of thing too, just where it's quiet and they're doing some task, and this could be for men or for women, but it's an opportunity to really let dialogue take center stage. And I remember moments like that in my own childhood where there might be some sort of, big gathering that, my parents would take my brother and I to at a friend's house. And of course, the men all go off into one section of the house and the women are off in one section of the house. And when you're a child, you have that freedom to be able to float between the two. And I remember just sitting quietly and listening to both and observing. And of course, the spot with the women was always more fun to me because it's where the food was. So that's where I would migrate usually. But the stories they would tell and the gossip and just the dialogue and how the quality of banter changes between the two genders, it's something that I think I just kind of really soaked up as a sponge because I enjoyed listening to it so much.
Oh, it does come out in in your book in that interaction,
Oh, I'm
And
glad. Good.
being set in Kashi, there's a lot about scriptures, about rituals, about superstition. And you mentioned in our back and forth that you were superstitious. So talk to us about the power of superstition in the book.
Yeah, I'm very, very superstitious, to the point of I have superstitions assigned to my writing. I never talk about what I'm working on with anyone. I'm also very fearful of the evil eye. Like I have a real respect for the evil eye. So I'm careful to never talk about anything that I'm very excited about or that I hope will happen. I never want to put that out into the world because you never know who's listening and how that hope or dream might be crushed. So superstition, I think what I liked about playing with it in this book was also its how it was tied together with story and how superstitions can be created. There's this element of a green parrot in the book where people are just, whenever one appears, it's seen as this harbinger of bad luck. And that springs out of a story that has happened in the city. And that's something I totally made up. But I was interested in how that works and also how superstition, ultimately, it's about control, right? So I am saying I'm not going to talk about something in my life because I'm ultimately trying to control how it happens or whether or not it happens. And it could be about anything. A common superstition here is that, you don't open an umbrella indoors, or, if you crack a mirror, you'll have bad luck for 7 years. Like, there's so many. One in our house is you never pass salt from hand to hand to another person, because if you do, you'll always have like a quarrel with that person. So again, that's all about control, about trying to control a situation that you really have no control over, but you're telling yourself that you have this one element. I really am a logical, rational person at my heart, but my feeling with these things is if they're harmless, if they're easy enough for me to incorporate into my life and it doesn't hurt anybody or anything, then why not? Why not simply do it? I think what's interesting and what I tried to play around with in terms of superstition in the book is, when does it go from being harmless to being toxic, to being something that actually affects people's lives? And that goes along with the gossip and the storytelling. You know, how does a story travel from mouth to mouth to mouth and start out as something very benign, entirely harmless, but the more it's told, the more it's embellished upon, can become a real weapon that hurts people, that can even kill people and ruin generations of lives. And that was a lot of, I don't want to say fun, but it was something that was really interesting to me to just explore in this book.
The green parrots and the anklets, the tinkle of the anklets. So, Kashi is supposed to be this place milling around with the business of death. It's crowded, it's messy, it's dirty, it's not too safe. Everyone out to make a quick buck out of you. But you portray that in a very muted way. Your words are quiet, but your sentences pack a punch. And your pages bring Kashi to life for us. So how much time did you spend in Kashi before writing this book or during the book?
So spoiler alert, Sita, I have never been to Benares. I have not yet been able to visit the city. I've been to India several times, but only ever as a tourist, so not for very long durations of time. And this was something, deciding to write about such an iconic and important place that I had never visited was not something that I just decided on a whim. I mentioned that article that a friend had sent me about death hostels that piqued my interest to begin with. It was several years before I ended up doing anything with that. And I didn't even end up starting to write at that period of time. It was more satisfying my own curiosity about the place and about what death hostels were and how they worked. I really was just interested in Benares and learning more about the logical underpinning for why it is as important as it is, why it has this effect that everybody says it does, that if you go there and you die there, you'll be freed from the cycle of rebirth. I wanted to know the reasoning behind that. And as I was learning about that reasoning and doing research into that, I think my interest was piqued even more. And knowing that I hadn't been there, I wanted to be able to see it. So I started consulting a lot of other things like books of photography and documentary, memoir, more films, like anything that I could get, short movies on YouTube, anything that could really put me there. And in doing all of this what I now know was foundational work and foundational research, in between, I started just feeling the first pricks of some sort of story coming to me. I would hear a character saying something and I didn't know who they were or what their deal was yet, but I had a piece of dialogue from them. Or I would just see a scene, just like have a line from a scene in my head. And I didn't know who any of the people were yet, but I had that line to work with. So all of that just started coming with more frequency the more research I started doing, until it got to a point where I had so much of it that the thought was, I have this inspiration that has come to me whether I like it or not. So even though I might not feel like I am the right person to write this book, and I still have that feeling in many ways, who am I at the end of the day? I have never been to the city. I do not have any family history with that city because my parents are from Gujarat, so I am Gujarati. And then I also have an added obstacle of being born and raised in the United States of America and educated within a Western education system. So I had yet another obstacle to surmount. So what made me qualified to write this story? And I don't know. I don't know what makes me qualified. But I do know that I had something plant itself within me. And I think any artist will tell you that you have a choice with inspiration. And when something comes to you, I don't know anyone who would pass it up and say, no, this idea, we can't do this. Let's wait for another idea to come. You can't. That almost feels like rejecting the gods in a way. So I did, for better or worse, I did. And, this is the book that ended up coming out of it.
Well, amazingly, I think I've never been there. And, I was thinking if I go there, I'm going to take her book as my roadmap into the place because it's so detailed,
Don't do
You go,
that. You'll get like irrevocably lost, Sita.
but you also mentioned other books that you referred to at the end of your book. And I made a list of those. I am very interested
My
in.
two favorites, Sita, were End Time City with the photographer Michael Ackerman. When you look at his photographs, and I recommend this to everybody who's listening, his photographs, you just turn the pages and you can feel ghosts just float out of the pages. His perspective and his point of view were absolutely informative in like the atmosphere that I wanted to create. And then there's that movie, Forest of Bliss, directed by Robert Gardner, which I think was made in the 80s, 1986. And again, it's an almost wordless documentary. It's about 2 hours long, but he's chronicling 24 hours in Benares, and there's no narration. So it's wonderful. It's just him taking you through these various parts of the city. You don't know anything about the people that he's profiling or filming. So it's really up to you to just have this experience and take away from it as you will. But again, it has that very, very specter-filled quality, very ghosty, where you just feel like you can feel that air crackling around you with something in it, and you want to know what that something is.
I look forward to going through that reference list. And there were a couple of, you said that it came to you. There are a couple of things I noticed while reading your book. There may not be any questions here, but it's a general observation and you can speak to it if you have something to add. When the crowd breaks into Shankar Bhavan by breaking down the gate and walking over it. So let me read that bit from you. The crowd surged, each pushing forward until this human mass threatened to crush the iron gates. And then in another place, you have the iron bar swayed, the hinges rocked, the ancient metal pulled apart from concrete walls, and the gates that had stood for centuries fell with a metal crash, etc., etc. I was reminded of the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. And DC is 20 minutes from where you live, right? I know your book was written way before that, but it made it so vivid for me. As I was reading the book, I thought, God, this must be how it felt to be in DC that day. I mean, so I could visualize it. So I don't know if you have anything to say. That's just an observation.
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to say about it either. I was not in DC that day, but I was certainly hearing about what was happening, and I have many friends who are close by, and it was terrifying. It was pretty terrifying, and I would say probably magnified times 100 if you compare it to what I wrote about. What's interesting to me is I remember that some iteration or very close iteration of this scene of this mob of people breaking down the gate in the novel was in the earliest draft of my book, and I had given it to a very, very small number of people to read once I finally finished a complete draft. And I remember one person reading that scene and being like, I don't know if I believe that this would happen. So, I mean, you can take from that what you will.
Yes,
But, yeah.
it
And that was,
can.
fortunately, yeah, I didn't listen to that comment because I had been present when a similar scene had happened at one moment in my life. And it wasn't as violent as that, but I could see it becoming very violent. When people are motivated by something they really, really want or something they really, really believe, that's a powerful force. And I always am wary of a group situation, always, no matter how benign, because whenever you participate in a group, you are signing up to become part of whatever they collectively believe. And that's never going to incorporate everything you specifically believe. It's going to just become this weird amalgamation of like the most common things floating to the top of whatever this group believes. And that's very frightening to me. I never want to be in a situation where I am basically boxed in by this other thing. I guess I just value my free agency so much, and just the ability to take a step aside and say, well, this is my bullet list, and I'm going to stay true to my bulleted list. So, you know, you all go off and do what you need to do on your own, but I'm going to move forward. It's definitely, it's an interesting comparison to make. And I was very startled when I read that in your email, because I hadn't thought about that at all. Yeah.
You know, you've written the book, you've gone through it so many times, and you know, now
Yeah.
it's like, God, I don't want to look at it, but those of us looking at it with fresh eyes.
You're totally right. I mean, unfortunately, it really, really is that. Isn't it horrible? I was telling my mom, it almost feels like buying a car or buying a house, where in the beginning you're so excited. You're so excited and you have all of these hopes and dreams for what you want it to be. And by the time it finally gets there and it's, you know, you've acquired the car or house, or you've published the book, it's just kind of like you're so done. Like you've been living with it for so long that all the excitement has evaporated. I don't mean that. Like, of course, I'm very, very excited to have my book out in the world, but it's just to give an illustration. When you live with something, I've been living with this book for 12 years now. That's a very, very long time. It's a long chunk of time.
And you know, things that you wouldn't have seen, of course, it strikes because it's the time that the person is reading it in, right? So when I read the page about the fires in the Ghats, you know, they're burning bodies and the fires, and you actually, I think the way you said it, it looked like it's going to look really beautiful. And that was the day President Biden was commemorating the going in memory of reaching 500,000 people dead of COVID. So it even though the two situations are so different, but it immediately, you know, I was listening to him and I was reading that part of it, and it just, the two just kind of blended together. So there is, you know, we have to remember, you know, memories are important. You know, and I think one. Sorry.
Yeah. No, no, I'm sorry. The connections are interesting. And you know, once I received the finished copy of the book, and I was kind of, this sounds absurd, but I had to refamiliarize myself with it because the distance between finishing it. But I was noticing all these references I had made to fever sweeping the village. And that was a little chilling to me, actually. And I did wonder, people reading it now, how they might react to it, because I have this unnamed sickness, you know, appear a couple of different times in these village flashbacks. And it seemed very similar to what's going on. And the reason I didn't name it is, well, I didn't see a point to naming it. Like, you know, at a certain point, you know, a sickness is sickness, and why it didn't need to get more specific than that. But I realized in doing that and being so general, I had made it so that anybody could fit whatever into that reference. And unfortunately, that means also whatever is happening to us globally right now. You can't anticipate that. It's spooky almost.
It is, yes. You know, and I think Ramesh suffering from survivor's guilt, basically, because he survived that illness. So that was also very interesting. And there are a few more questions, but I don't want to hog up all your time. I see questions on the right, so we'll answer a few questions and then I have a few more. So,
sure.
Okay, so let me just go through with this. Or somebody has asked me, how many days did you have to live in Benares? So that question has been answered. But also there's a question, have you included the other striking features of the city in your narrative? Kabir, Premchand, Ustad Bismillah Khan, Silk Weavers, Red Light District, Banaras Hindu University, etc.
I have only included the red light district, and there's a reference to the university, but I never actually name it. You know, you always have, definitely those are things that I encountered, you know, in all of the reading that I was doing. So what I find is that you kind of, that pre-research that you are doing, you just fill yourself with everything that you read, everything that you learn. And then when you start writing, you just organically call upon it when you need that piece. So it would have been lovely, especially to include the silk weavers. And I watched so many videos of, just that process, wordless videos where it was just, filming a master craftsman and they are just weaving these incredible pieces of fabric. But there was no real way to be able to incorporate everything. I didn't want this to become kind of packed with all of these Benares references. It had to be something that was organic and really informed the story in some way. But the amount of material is mind-boggling, and it's definitely a rabbit hole that you can fall down into and really never get out of.
There's another question that says, waiting for good death in Benares also has a bad side to it, that of discarding the older members of the family in the pretext of allowing them a good death. Have you raised this ugly side up in your?
I think there is one family because, the rules with most of these hostels, and certainly the rule with my fictional Shankar Bhavan, is that you have to have somebody with you. The dying person must have at least a single person, accompanying them. But usually one would hope, of course, that you have your entire family around you. So I think when, what the person asking, what they might find when they're reading the book, there are a couple of situations where either a family is really keen to get going and is asking if they can just leave their family member there and go, or minors are left in charge of somebody who is dying, and the person who's supposed to be the adult or the grown-up in the situation is just simply not present.
The other question is, generally the cremation and other death rituals do not include women. Have you explored the women-centric points of view regarding these?
I hope I did.
Yeah.
I hope I did. Yeah, I don't want to say too much about what actually happens in the book, but I hope I tried to get those details as accurately as possible, and definitely wanted to at least very minimally explore the differences between the roles in grieving and mourning that are assigned to men and to women in a very non-judgmental way, I hope.
Mm-hmm. And there are other questions which you have actually answered. There's one more. Which other cities of India are you familiar with? Are you planning a fiction set in other cities, say Mysore? You could call it the city of good mirth. Yes, we'll give you a laugh for sure.
I would love that. Yeah, so mostly I mentioned that my parents are from Gujarat, so mostly I have traveled quite a bit in Gujarat and also done, the typical, I mentioned I've only ever been to India as a tourist because I've done the typical Rajasthan tour of, Jaipur, Agra, like all of that. Of course, I'd love to come back. I haven't done any of South India. When you think about it, I haven't really done that much of India at all, like just really 2 states and that's it. And there's just so much to see. So I'd love to be able to come back and visit. But of course, none of us are really traveling right now.
Correct. Yes. Everything is virtual. And then I have, as with every other good book, the readers have to wait impatiently for the next book. How long are you going to keep us waiting for your next book? And now you said it took you 12 years to finish, to get this one to publication. How long do you want us to wait?
Well, see, that is the ultimate compliment to be told by anybody that they're waiting, especially when you think about in that 12 years when not very many people in my life knew that I was doing anything. So it really was laboring in the dark, which was entirely my choice to do it that way. To come out on the other side and ever be told from someone that they're waiting for a next thing is it's really the highest of compliments. But I mentioned that I'm very superstitious, so I never talk about what I'm working on, but I will say that I think I am, based on the 12 years, I am a pretty slow writer. And I never have a full outline when I get going. So I never know what's going to happen next or the specifics of the plot when I start. My writing is very much this process of discovery, of finding out what the story is. And that takes a really long time because when you do it that way, you often end up writing yourself into a corner. you're going down this alley that you thought was where the story was, and it wasn't. So then you have to backtrack and then try again. There's a lot of trying and failing and failing and failing and trying again and just hoping to eke your way out. So I am very, very slow, and I apologize for that. I
We'll
also
wait.
don't.
We'll
I
wait,
also
but some of us are old. You need to remember that.
don't say that. Don't say that. But the other thing is, I wonder with any future books that I might be, if I'm destined to be able to write future books, and I would love to be able to. I don't know how similar they will be to this one. This one was very much its own beast. It had a very highly specific tone and voice to it that were deliberate choices. So, with anything coming out of me from the future, I don't know that it's going to sound or be similar to what this book is.
This book was like the flow of the river. It
Oh,
literally was. It
thank you
was.
so much.
Yeah, I mean, the way it went through, I felt that way. Then some of the general questions, your literary influences or authors that you like.
Yeah, I kind of divide what I love to read into two categories. One is these very long, epic books with a lot of characters, a lot of plot lines, just so many, there's a whole world that engulfs you. So that is books like A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth and Midnight's Children, um, Anna Karenina, A House for Mr. Biswas, just these huge, huge epic books. I love books like that. But then I also really love these short, concentrated novels where the sentences are very, very clean and the language is very precise and almost on the surface simple, but it just packs a huge emotional punch. So these are writers like Penelope Fitzgerald and Anita Desai and Sigrid Nunez and E.M. Forster. Really, really love those books. And I think, the language in this novel is quite elaborate at times. And, I think some of that came out of the process of me changing so much as a writer. I had an idea of what I wanted the writing to be when I started the book. And then by the time it had finished, so much time had passed. So I now have a different idea. I think I would like to get to a point where things start to be a little bit more simplified. But for this story, I think that elaborate language was suited, as well as all of these plot lines and characters, et cetera. That's what I really loved reading at the time and still do. So that's what I wanted to create. But as time goes by, I'm very, very drawn to these small, compact, concentrated works as well.
So, any good books you've come across recently that you can recommend to our audience?
Yeah, actually, I have one, The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. And I'm
I've
doing
read that.
yeah,
Yes.
I'm doing an event with Marjan on March 11th through the Asian American Writers Workshop. But this is a beautiful, lovely, lovely book. She's
Yes.
also dealing with time and memory, and it's a love story, but it's absolutely a world that you can fall into, I think, with pre-Revolutionary War Iran. And it's a real treat to read it. So I recommend that to everybody if they haven't checked it out yet.
I would recommend that too. That's a good book. And then there's, one silly question which usually people ask these days. And if I don't ask it, someone else is going to ask you this. I don't know. I was very surprised when I found people asking this. In the movie version of your book, who do you think will play Pramesh? Who would play Sagar? Should it be a double role played by the same actor?
I know. Well, again, because I'm so superstitious, I feel like I can't say anything, because then this movie will never get made ever. But I will tell you, when I was writing and I had kind of an image or a picture of who Pramesh was in my head, I always pictured somebody like Irfan Khan, with that very, very, where he's very quiet and he speaks very little, but his face and his emotions, like everything is there if you dig deep enough. And of course, we all lost him, not too long ago, I think early on in the pandemic. But yeah, somebody like that, I love so many of his movies.
Yeah.
somebody with that kind of temperament was what I had in mind with this.
I think he would have fit, yes. And who knows, it could be a Netflix serial with about 4 or 5 episodes. So then you'd have to pick from there as to who it could be. So
My goodness.
is there anything else you would like to share with our audience?
This has been such a treat, Sita, for me to be able to do this with you all. I hope everybody watching has enjoyed it. And if they end up picking the book, I hope you do enjoy the book and are just able to find some form of escape in it in this time that is so unprecedented and really stressful for so many of us. I hope you're able to glean some little bit of joy from it if you pick it up.
Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you for making the time. It's been a wonderful hour. I didn't even realize we spent an entire hour. Thank you for making the time. Thank you to Penguin India for connecting you up with Shubha and having done this. Thank you to the Mysore Literary Forum Charitable Trust for hosting this, and all the book club members for watching it. We've all been looking forward to it. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a treat. Bye.
Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of your morning.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.